Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. One might assume that as you age, you become more patient, more understanding, more sympathetic to the human dilemma. But I find that instead of becoming more patient, I'm becoming more intolerant of deliberate unreason. So today's observations are about why being sufficiently deluded into thinking that someone will be coming to our salvation is really dumb. This, of course, is a rejection of reason and personal accountability. It is really, how shall I say it, deluded. Our political reality today is akin to living on a bad trip of lysergic dilithiamide since we have popped the brown acid instead of dropping the purple microdot. I've dedicated my channel to Christ and what appears to me to be the eternal struggle against the fourth forced march into ideological possession. I must remind my readers and my listeners that the warmth of collectivism is as cold as the steel it invariably uses to hold humanity in chains. The great problem with conservatism today is that it has become unwilling to call a spade and to take on the illiberal horde that has captured and holds public discourse in a vice-like grip of conformity and ideological possession. It saddens me to say that as an erstwhile musician, that the vast majority of musicians invariably support the most radical leftist government with socio-economic agendas that will result in destroying the very culture that their music depends upon. Many of my former musical chums will support the most illiberal and authoritarian pack of hoodlums they can find if they offer them something for free, which is, of course, never free. So one must ask, why is this the case? Stupidity is most evidenced by an utter lack of curiosity. A stupid person invariably accepts simplistic answers to multivariate complex issues. Then they believe that by putting their faith in the charlatans who offer these simplistic solutions, that those who do so must be the experts to be trusted, but only as long as the so-called experts represent the view of the majority. This is why the left knew it had to take control of the Fourth Estate, while using our taxes to fund their propaganda. The accepted narrative, therefore, has become so widely accepted that few will dare to challenge it. But the person who refuses to question the commonly accepted narrative is both a fool and an idiot, since the accepted narrative has proven itself to be demonstrably wrong, time and time again. Just look at the lies told to force people to march in unthinking lockstep during the dark days of COVID that practically killed the live music industry. This despite the fact that many musicians continue to this day to support what we now know were lies. Moreover, by all evidence, fools and idiots who believe the official narrative represent the vast majority till this very day, and corrupt political actors both know this and depend on it. But this alone is not today's topic, for there are many so-called right-wingers who have developed similar thinking based upon blindly accepting what the majority of their ideological brethren think. For those of you who assume you are conservative, yet have little to no idea what that means philosophically, you might have noticed that I have totally run out of patience for all unthinking and unreasoned discourse, no matter who it comes from. Therefore, this video and blog, as most of mine are only for those who truly wish to peel and dice an onion despite your watering eyes. Many of you will not like what I have to share with you today, despite me providing conclusive evidence to support what I am about to state. My first point: Stephen Harper is not the conservative hero you assume that he is. Yes, you read that correctly. You heard that correctly. So let us examine Harper's role in bailing out the malfeasant banks after the 2008 financial crisis, where he literally paid for crime using our taxes. The crisis was a result of using the banking system corruptly. This means exploiting financial institutions, regulations, and services for illegal gain, holding the origin of illicit funds, or breaching legal and ethical standards. This often involves a collaboration between individuals and, in some cases, corrupt employees, resulting in the washing of dirty money, the facilitation of bribery, and the defrauding of the bank itself. This goes on today, where Toronto Dominion Bank has been demonstrated to be laundering money for drug cartels. Here is a breakdown of what it means when someone uses a banking system corruptly, based on common fraudulent practices, and how Harper supported this corruption by funding the corrupt banking system. How has the banking system been used to fund criminal activity? Number one, money laundering, dirty money integration. Corrupt actors use banks to make illegally obtained money from corruption, drug trafficking, or organized crime appear to be legitimate. Placement, breaking large amounts of cash into smaller, less conspicuous deposits, known as smurfing, to avoid detection thresholds. Moving funds layering through a complex series of transactions, often across international borders or through multiple accounts, to disguise the audit trail. Of course, Marxist Carney is deeply involved in such banking illegitimacy. In fact, he is one of the great leaders of it. Integration, using the laundering money to purchase high-value assets such as real estate or businesses, making the funds appear illegal. 2. Bribery and insider corruption. This occurs when bank employees are involved, either voluntarily or via coercion, to bypass safety protocols. Facilitating illegal accounts. Employees may accept bribes to open accounts for criminals, sometimes bypassing standard "you know your customer" KYC regulations. Rogue trading. Traders at financial institutions engaging in unauthorized trading and manipulating internal controls to hide losses. Demand draft fraud. Insiders remove demand draft books, know the coding punching, and create fraudulent drafts without debiting an account. 3. Fraudulent loan and credit schemes. Perpetrators sometimes acting in collusion with bankers, use the banking system to extract money with no intention of repayment. Fraudulent loan applications, using false information, fake documents, and forged signatures to secure loans for non-existent entities or individuals. Straw borrowers, using someone else's identity to front for the true borrower who would not qualify for a loan. Cash for dirt. A corrupt bank makes a loan on raw land where no development has occurred, sometimes based on inflated appraisals. 4. bypassing regulatory controls. Corrupt actors actively work to evade detection by regulatory authorities, structuring deposits, breaking up transactions to stay below reporting limits, shell companies, utilizing entities that exist only on paper to hide the true beneficial owners of the money, misleading information, providing false, vague, or contradictory information to bank employees during opening or transactions. Digital and technology-based corruption. With the rise of digital banking, criminals use sophisticated methods to exploit systems. Account takeovers, ATO, gaining unauthorized access to online accounts to siphon funds. Phishing or vishing, deceiving individuals or employees into providing login credentials. Invoice fraud, changing payment details to redirect funds to an account controlled by the criminal. The impact this has on society. Using banking corruptly can lead to the collapse of financial institutions, undermining the rule of law, and facilitate further criminal activities. So what role did Harper play in helping to finance this species of corruption using my tax dollars and yours? He was not directly involved in any of this, but he was directly involved in helping to what he denied doing, which was in fact bailing them out, rather than holding them legally accountable. Stephen Harper's government's 2008 financial crisis response. During the 2008 global financial crisis, the Stephen Harper government provided liquidity support to Canadian banks primarily through the Insured Mortgage Purchase Program, IMPP, which involved the government purchasing billions in insured mortgages to ensure financial institutions could continue lending. In other words, you and I became the owner of mortgages. The government ought never to be involved in private business, ever, on any level. Of course, this is the heart of socialism and fascism, to make the state the handlers of private corporations. $25 billion credit backstop for banks, not a bailout, Harper said. And I provide all the links for my research so you know that I'm actually stating verifiable truth. Harper explicitly stated this was not a bailout in the American sense, as the government was buying high-quality insured assets that were expected to be repaid with interest rather than giving away money to failing firms. And again, the link. However, independent reports estimated that the total peak support, including the liquidity from the Bank of Canada, reached 114 billion Canadian dollars. Yes, you read that right. 114 billion Canadian dollars. Our government has no business being in private enterprise. Key findings. Liquidity versus bailout. The government framed the intervention as a credit backstop to prevent a freeze in the Canadian lending market. This is not a bailout, Harper said. The IMPP mechanism, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC, was used to buy up to $75 billion, initially $25 billion, in insured mortgage pools from banks. Risk transfer. While the mortgages were already insured, the program moved the risk of these assets directly onto the government's books. That's not the government's books. They moved it directly onto you and to me to help fund criminal activity in banks. Think about that. And he still justifies this behavior to this day. Economic necessity. The new move is part of a broader shift in late 2008 where the Harper government moved from denying a recession They denied it to implementing a significant stimulus package. They couldn't even make up their own mind. They denied it, and then they injected billions of dollars, 114 billion, into the economy or into the corrupt banks. Financial performance. Proponents argue that Canada's banking system remained among the world's safest because these measures prevented the kind of collapse seen in the United States. In other words, it prevented people from being held legally accountable. Details. Background. The credit crunch. In late 2008, global credit markets froze as banks became unwilling to lend each other due to fears regarding toxic assets. Even though Canada's banks were more conservative than their U.S. counterparts, they were affected by the international lack of liquidity. Again, all the links I'm providing here. The Harper government intervened to ensure that Canadian businesses and consumers could still access loans for houses, cars, and operations. Was it a secret bailout? The term bailout is a point of contention. The Harper government maintained that because the assets, mortgages, were already insured by the taxpayer via CMHC, the government was simply providing a market for those assets when no one else would. And again, all the links I provide in each section. However, the Canadian Centre for Political Alternatives, CCPA, argued that the scale of the support, which included emergency lending from the Bank of Canada, was much larger than the government publicly acknowledged at the time. Much larger. So they were lying to us. Comparison, Canada versus the U.S. U.S. approach. The Troubled Asset Relief Program, TARP, often involved the government taking equity or ownership in banks to prevent them from failing. The Canadian approach focused on providing liquidity, cash, in exchange for assets, mortgages, to keep the system moving, without the government taking ownership of the banks. And again, all the links. Practical takeaway. Market stability. The primary goal of the support was to prevent a collapse of the Canadian housing market and the broader economy, despite the fact we're back there right now. The housing market is absolutely collapsing. And again, I provide the links. Taxpayer cost. Harper argued the program would cost taxpayers nothing because the government had earned interest on the mortgages it purchased. However, it did increase the national debt in short term. And again, all the links. Regulatory legacy. Following the crisis, the Harper government tightened mortgage lending standards, such as reducing maximum amortization periods to prevent a similar bubble from forming in Canada. Again, the links. Now here's the financial fallout from the 2008 Insured Mortgage Purchase Program. The financial fallout of the Canadian government's response to the 2008 crisis was characterized by a significant increase in federal debt. But it also resulted in a net profit for the government from the mortgages assets it purchased. By the time the Insured Mortgage Purchase Program, IMPP, concluded, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation had earned approximately $2.5 billion in net interest from the taxpayer. That's right, it earned money from us. And again, I provide the links. Now here's the caveat emptor. However, the broader economic fallout included the end of a decade of federal surpluses as Canada moved into a $55.6 billion deficit by 2009-2010 to fund stimulus and liquidity measures. Again, I provide the sources. Key findings. Government profit. The federal government earned a profit on the IMPP because the interest paid by banks on the mortgage pools exceeded the government's own borrowing cost. Again, the links. Debt accumulation to fund the liquidity injections in the Economic Action Plan, Canada's federal debt increased to over $150 billion between 2008 and 2015. Again, I cite my sources. Bank resilience. None of Canada's major banks failed or required TARP-style equity buyouts, allowing them to remain profitable and resume dividend increases sooner than their international peers, despite, of course, them being as crooked as a dog's hind leg. Literally, we rewarded them for defrauding us. Think about that. And the government helped them to do it. Housing market inflation. Some economists argue that massive liquidity injection prevented a necessary correction, contributing to long-term rise in Canadian household debt and housing prices. That's why we are where we are today, because of the fallout from this intervention. Governments must never intervene in private industry in this manner. It is the most unconservative thing you could possibly do. Credit rating. Despite the increased debt, Canada maintained its AAA credit rating throughout the fallout, a rarity among G7 nations at the time, which only proves how utterly corrupt systems are everywhere throughout the West. The banking systems are deeply immoral. Direct financial impact, profit and loss. The IMPP was designed as a swap, where the government used its superior credit rating to borrow money at lower rates and use that cash to buy mortgages from banks that carried higher interest rates. The gain? The government effectively acted as a middleman, pocketing the spread between the low interest it paid to bondholders and the higher interest it received from mortgage pools. Again, all my links are associated in each section. The cost, while the program itself was profitable, the administration and borrowing requirements contributed to the government's need to issue massive amounts of new debt, which carried long time servicing costs. Again, my links. Long-term structural fallout. The fallout wasn't just about immediate dollars and cents. It fundamentally changed the Canadian financial landscape. Read that again. Let me say that again. It fundamentally changed the Canadian financial landscape. So you can't blame this all on the Liberals, although they have more than their share to blame, because they are infinitely more corrupt than even the corruption we're reading about here. 1. CMHC exposure. The government's exposure to the housing market increased dramatically as the CMHC's total insurance in force peaked near $600 billion following the crisis. Again, my links. Moral hazard. Critics argued the program created moral hazard by signaling to big banks that the government would always provide liquidity during a crisis, potentially encouraging riskier lending behavior in the future. Again, my sources linked. Regulatory tightening. In direct response to the fallout, the Harper government began a series of macro-prudential tightenings, such as reducing the maximum mortgage amortization from 40 down to 25 years in 2012. Again, cited sources. Comparisons public versus private outcome. The federal government, hear this clearly, the federal government moved from a $9.6 billion surplus in 2007 to a $55.6 billion deficit in 2009. Sources cited. Big Five banks maintained profitability, receiving roughly $114 billion in total liquidity support at the peak of the crisis. Literally, we were paying these corrupt banks to continue with their nonsense. Canadian homeowners avoided the mass foreclosure seen in the U.S., but average household net income rose significantly. Again, all my links. Practical takeaway. Taxpayer protection. The IMPP is widely considered a successful intervention in terms of direct cost, as it returned more money to the Treasury than it cost to implement. Again, all my sources. Debt legacy. The primary negative fallout was the structural deficit it created, which took the government until 2014 to 2015 to balance again. Taking 6 years to balance the budget again. At least they did it. But it was a result of intervening in a way that they ought never have done. Market stability. The program successfully prevented a bank run or a total collapse of credit, which likely saved the broader economy from a much deeper and longer recession. My conclusions. No true conservative ought to bail out banks due to their own criminal conduct, particularly when no charges were ever forthcoming to punish those who had caused the financial crisis of 2008. Well, let's go on to another topic. The failure of our immigration policies and the terrorism that is now an inherent part of Canadian society. 2014 Parliament shooting and Stephen Harper's immigration policy. The 2014 attack in Ottawa was carried out by murderous Islamist Michael Jihaf Bibo, a Canadian-born citizen whose mother was a high-ranking official at the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada. Again, I provide my links. While Stephen Harper's government maintained consistent immigration levels of approximately 250,000 per year for economic growth, meaning cultural decline, the shooter's actions were investigated by the RCMP and attributed to radicalization rather than immigration policy. Yeah, right. My British ancestors often murdered people in the name of Allah. Again, I provide the link. Extensive reviews were conducted regarding security failures and the shooter's motives, though they did not link to the broader immigration crisis. Harper, you betrayed your own culture, and you knew you were doing it. And again, my links to these findings from the RCMP and the OPP. Key findings. The attack on October the 22nd, 2014, vile Islamic terrorist Michael Jihaf Bibo killed Corporal Nathan Cirillo at the National War Memorial before storming Parliament Hill, where he was killed in a shootout, sadly not soon enough. Again, I cite my sources, excuse me. Shooter's background. Jihaf Bibo was born in Canada, Montreal, if you consider Montreal to be a part of Canada, which I don't. His mother, Susan Bibo, was a deputy chairperson at the Immigration and Refugee Board, IRB. And again, my links. Harper's immigration stance. The Harper government viewed immigration as an economic tool, maintaining high levels of intake to address labor shortages and demographic shifts. Shifts that he had caused. Again, my links. Investigation. Following the attacks, the RCMP conducted a massive criminal investigation, and the Ontario Provincial Police performed an independent review of the security response. Motives. Authorities identified the shooter's motives as being driven by ideological and political grievances related to Canada's foreign policy, especially its military involvement in the Middle East. Precisely. What a mistake to allow a single sand ape into my country. Yes, those are my actual opinions. Shoot me if you don't like them. I'm ready to die now anyway, looking at what's happening in my neighborhood here. Attack on Ottawa. PM Harper cites terrorist motive, a motive that he had helped to create. the bloody fool. And again, I cite my links. Details. The shooter and the bureaucrat connection. Michael Zehaf Bibo's mother, Susan Bibo, was indeed a high-level official within the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada, IRB. However, the IRB is an independent, quasi-judicial tribunal. I love the terms that these plutocratic bureaucrats use. Quasi-judicial, that operates separately from the government. Oh, sure it does. That sets immigration levels. Now, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. Yeah, they think that by renaming something, it becomes something that it wasn't always. A means of destroying our culture. My research states that because the shooter was born in Canada, his presence in the country was not a direct result of the immigration levels set during the Harper administration. That's what the research says. And then I say, yes, it was. Moreover, his mother, a senior Islamic bureaucrat, ought never to have been working in our bureaucracy. Don't you think that she knew of her own son's views and his potential threat to peace, order, and good government? How stupid do they think we are? We're constantly asked to swallow the most blatant contradictions. And it's not just the left that's saying this crap to us. It's people that are passing as conservatives. Stephen Harper's immigration policy. The Harper government between 2006 and 2015 is often noted for maintaining historically high immigration levels for a conservative government. The primary reasons cited were economic growth, offsetting Canada's aging population and shrinking workforce, cited my sources. Political strategy. Oh, this is a doozy. Actively courting immigrant communities, a new voter base for the Conservative Party. This is the very thing that I hear you people telling me that the left is doing it, which indeed they are. But my point is, they all do it. Why do they do it? Because they don't trust Indigenous Canadians to continue to support their ridiculous policies, because we know over time, with an overwhelming weight of evidence, that they're all lying to us. Oh, I'm so fed up. Political strategy, actively courting, shifting the system toward express entry to prioritize immigrants with specific job skills. Oh, how wonderful. How truly equal. Investigations into the incident. Contrary to the claim that no investigation was done, several high-profile inquiries took place. Number 1, RCMP criminal investigation. Analyzed Zehaf Bibo's laptop, cell phone, and a video he recorded before the attack to determine his motives and potential accomplices. OPP review. Number 2, an independent report by the Ontario Provincial Police criticized a lack of coordination between different security forces on Parliament Hill. 3, legislative response. The incident led directly to the introduction of Bill C-51, Anti-Terrorist Act of 2015, which expanded the powers of Canada's intelligence agencies, who have still done a lamentably terrible job and have done nothing to address the type of immigration that's bringing violence into my country. Practical takeaway. Distinguished citizenship. The shooter was a Canadian by birth, meaning immigration intake levels at the time did not dictate his legal status in the country. Again, links. This is all linked. I hardly need to say it because everything is thoroughly researched, and you can look up. You can just click on the links and look for yourself. Understanding the IRB. The mother's role at the IRB involved adjudicating refugee claims, not setting the national mass immigration quotas. She should have adjudicated her husband, whom I believe she was separated from or divorced from at the time. Review official reports. For detailed findings on the shooting, the RCMP and OPP reports provide the most comprehensive data on the root causes identified by investigators, which focus on mental health and radicalization. Oh, yes, it's always he was just upset or he was having a bad day that excuses Islam for being invariably murderous. Now, how can Pierre Poilievre reverse this legacy of Harper's policy failures? Well, first of all, he would need to admit where his former boss went catastrophically wrong. The first thing Pierre needs to do, after receiving such an overwhelming endorsement at the CCP convention, is to rid his party of fake conservatives, since there are far too many leftists wearing blue. It ought to be as simple as doing blind tests to uncover what his MPs actually believe in terms of their political philosophy and the most effective possible conservative policies to address the radical leftism that has captured this government. We need to look at the leading conservative minds of the modern era and what they actually believed. Edmund Burke, 1729 to 1797, often cited as the father of modern conservatism. His reflections on the French Revolution argued for gradual change and skepticism of radical, rationalist social engineering. Michael Oakeshott, 1901 to 1990, British philosopher who advocated for a politics of skepticism, favoring traditional and practical knowledge over ideological abstract planning. I love that, because there is no bigger skeptic than me. Friedrich Hayek, 1899 to 1992, a central figure in classical liberalism, libertarian conservatism, who defended free markets and warned against central planning and the road to serfdom. Obviously, Harper needed to read that one, as he centrally planned the bailout of the banks. Russell Kirk, 1918 to 1994, crucial to 20th century American conservatism. His work, The Conservative Mind, defines traditionalist values, emphasizing the permanent things. Roger Scruton, 1944 to 2020, a modern British philosopher who defended conservatism through the lens of aesthetics, culture, and the importance of place and community. A personal favorite of mine. David Hume, 1711 to 1776, provided a skeptical, empirical foundation for conservatism, emphasizing that custom and habit are more reliable than abstract reason. Alexis de Tocqueville, 1805 to 1859. His wonderful work, Democracy in America, is in my library. He analyzed the risks of democracy and equality, particularly the danger of soft despotism, while defending civic association. And he identified in that book, Democracy in America, the importance of church life to maintain democratic organizations. Roger Nozick, 1938 to 2002, American philosopher known for the libertarian conservative defense of the minimal state in Anarchy, State, and Utopia. Joseph de Maistre, 1753 to 1821, a strong voice for counter-revolutionary traditionalism, emphasizing throne and altar. And Richard Weaver, 1910 to 1963, known for his ideas have consequences, arguing that the loss of belief in absolute truths has led to modern decline. And that's what we're seeing today. Everything is subjective. The very belief that there could be objective truth is considered anathema among the postmodern left. In conclusion, therefore, Harper's financial and immigration policies were a complete rejection of conservatism. Harper proved himself to be an interventionist and turned the government into a lender used to help ease the outcome of patently immoral and illegal banking practices rather than holding them legally accountable. He made our financial situation worse while simultaneously refusing to even touch our immigration crisis, despite the connection between the shooter and a senior member of our bureaucracy, namely the terrorist's own mother. Moreover, the political philosophers I have mentioned generally share a focus on the limits of human reason, the value of established institutions like family and church, and the need for a deep suspicion of utopias. Pierre Poilievre ought to conduct a surprise test of his MPs to determine how well they actually understand what it means to be conservative, since I am certain many of them haven't got a clue. And if it is found that they do not share conservative values, then find folks who do, despite the fact that everything I have stated here can easily be known as fact. Anyone who hopes to create a society based upon Judeo-Christian ethics and conservatism must know this if they seek to preserve our legacy of 1,500 years of Christianity. This legacy came to the Dominion of Canada from our mother country, which makes me ask, why would anyone hate their own mother, who taught them the foundational importance of their heritage and of their faith? My simple answer, only a fool would do this. However, obviously, there are more than enough of them. I hope this episode has either lost me fake conservatives as followers and wishy-washy Christians, or even better, has caused some of you to think twice before endorsing people whose values do not align with that of yours. No one is coming to our salvation but Christ. There is no political solution to a moral, philosophical, and spiritual crisis. And believe me, we are in deep doo-doo. God bless you. These are things to think and pray about on this bitter, cold, blustery February the 7th, 2026.